I'll share with you a little bit about the WRC. We will look at an abstract example. We'll talk about what typically is in an abstract, what you include in an abstract. We will look at different abstracts for discipline-specific versus general audiences. And then we'll wrap up, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Okay, so hopefully you've heard of the WRC before. If you are not, we are a place on campus where you can get one-on-one help with any writing that you're doing in your classes or outside of your classes. So, of course, we help with class assignments, but we can help with any writing that you're doing. Our goal is not to just make one piece of writing really good. Our goal is for you to become a stronger writer and communicator. So we really focus on your writing growth, not just on making sure you have a really good paper. Obviously, we want you to have a really good paper, but your growth as a writer is what we're really concerned with. We are an interdisciplinary group of people, so we have tutors from all across the disciplines. We're not just English and writing majors. We also have engineering and computer science and lots of different kinds of writers in our writing center. So you can really bring anything that you're working on. And our goal is to help you become more confident in your skills. We have 3 different types of tutoring: in-person, Zoom, and e-tutoring, which is asynchronous. So there are lots of different ways to interact with us. You don't just have to come in person. If you can't physically make it, you can come on Zoom. If you can't even do that, you can send us a paper and we'll give you feedback that way. All right, so let's start talking about abstract. So you will need something to write on and with today, just to jot down some ideas. This can be your computer, a scrap piece of paper, just to get your brain going. So let's start with a little free writing question. So what do you already know about abstracts? Take a couple minutes and jot down some ideas. What is it that you know about them, if anything? And we'll talk about it in a minute. So right now we're just writing and thinking. Okay, finish up your last thought. And I want to ask you guys to kind of talk amongst yourselves and talk to me today. So there is going to be some engagement today, so hopefully you are ready to chat. So what are some things you guys jotted down? What are things you already know about abstracts? Yeah.
It's basically like a summary of what you're going to write about.
Okay, so it's like a summary. Good start.
Yeah. They usually include purpose, conclusions, and a general description of your methods.
Good. They usually include purpose, conclusions, general description of your methods. Very good. Yep.
They're usually pretty short, like 200, 300 words.
Yep, usually very short, which seems like, oh great, it's short, that's easy. But sometimes shorter means harder if you really have a complex argument you're trying to make or a complex research method. That can be even harder to describe in a short space. Other things? All right, awesome. Yes, so an abstract is a quick overview of your research. It is a short summary, usually about a paragraph, and you find abstracts in lots of different places. So in proposals, academic articles, conference presentations, dissertation, theses, books, you find these everywhere. And they are different than just an academic introduction. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. So the purpose of abstracts are multi-purpose. They are a reader-centered genre, meaning that most writing should be reader-centered, meaning you should be concerned with how your writing is being understood by someone else. But especially abstracts, they need to be very clear and as short as possible, but as contained with as much information as possible. That's what makes them kind of hard to write, which we'll talk about the elements in a minute. So an abstract should pique a reader's interest. You want someone to continue reading about your research after they've read your abstract. They should give your readers a general understanding of your research pretty quickly. They should provide readers with a kind of skeleton for your research. So unlike an introduction, the abstract is sort of like your whole project in miniature. It really should go through all the major elements of your project right there in a very short space. And it should prepare your readers for the complexity of your methods, results, and discussion. We are going to focus on we're going to focus on abstracts for a general reader today. So you're not going to be able to give every little detail of your research in an abstract. Obviously, it's 250 to 300 words. But it should prepare your reader to be able to understand what you're doing in your study. So let's look at an example of an abstract, one I just kind of randomly pulled from an article. And as I'm reading it, I want you to think about what's happening here. Like, what is the writer doing to get you as the reader to understand the article? If you had to kind of like outline what was happening here, what would you say the writer is doing? So I'll read it out loud, and as I do that, I want you to think if you can name the parts. Like, what is each sentence kind of doing here? So the writer says, social class is increasingly recognized as a powerful force in people's lives. Yet, despite the long and extensive stream of research on the upper echelons of organizations, we know little about how executives' formative childhood experiences with social class influence their strategic choices. In this study, we investigate the influence of chief executive officers, or CEOs, perceived social class origins on firm risk-taking. We also explore the moderating influences of other important career experiences in the form of elite education and diverse functional backgrounds. Our theory and findings highlight that an executive's social class origins have a lasting and varying impact on his or her preferences, affecting his or her tendency to take risks. By examining this novel managerial characteristic, we offer important implications for theorizing about social class in upper echelons. Take a minute, think about how might you outline this? Like, what's happening in this abstract? Yeah.
I feel like the first sentence kind of introduced the topic and exactly what question you're trying to answer.
Yeah, very good. The first sentence is pretty open, right? Like, social class is increasingly recognized as a powerful force in people's lives. We don't necessarily know anything about the study yet, but it's sort of gently guiding us into the major topic of discussion. We know after this sentence that they're going to be talking about social class, right? And then in the next one, we get a little bit more narrower. We get a little narrower, and we're understanding a little bit more deeply what about social class they're saying. Anything else you notice that this second sentence is doing?
It introduces the problem.
Yeah, it introduces a problem, right? The problem here is that we have a lot of research, but we don't really know much about how executives' childhood experiences with social class affect their choices. So we're starting to see what you might call a gap in the research, something that hasn't yet been studied. In the next sentence, what happens in that next sentence?
Talk about what's actually
Yeah, exactly. They're going into their study, which, surprisingly, fills that gap, right? Now they're addressing that gap. So we have the problem, and then we have how they're addressing that problem. Good. So they give some details about their study. Anything else you notice here toward the end? Other things they're doing in this
about the findings.
Talk about their findings, yep,
And also the significance of the research.
and some significance, exactly. Anything you think is anything missing here, or do you see any problems with this? It's not a perfect abstract. It is a published abstract, but I wouldn't say that it's perfect. Do you have any questions? I mean, of course there are questions. This isn't going to give all the information, but is there anything as a reader that you would have liked to know just from the abstract? Yes?
The methods they use.
Yeah, there's really no information on methods, right? That's a pretty big missing piece here. Yeah, good. You guys really pretty much outlined exactly what we have in what is in an abstract. So the first line introduces the broad topic, which is social class. The second line sets up. I like to use this word, even though you may have never heard this before, but the word exigence. That's a really good word to remember when you're writing up your research. The exigence is where you're establishing not just the problem, but the need for your specific research. Okay? This is not just a random problem. It is a problem that's exactly what you need it to be. So you kind of construct that exigence. Okay? The third and fourth line state the goals of the study. The fifth line broadly overviews the findings. And then the last line kind of hints at the implications or the significance of the study. And you'll see here we do have a missing piece here. They don't really talk about their methods, which would obviously strengthen the abstract and also strengthen our reading experience. Like, I want to know how you determined that social class has an impact. What did you do? Did you interview people? Did you survey people? Did you observe people? What did you do? So, we're going to skip that for now. So yeah, basically that is the sort of elements that almost every abstract has. Yes?
Could you go back real quick? I couldn't get everything down.
Sure. As we're thinking about that, I do want to point out a couple other things. Some words or phrases that kind of clue you into what they're doing. In the second sentence, they start with the word yet, despite. Those are some nice phrases to clue the reader into, okay, they're taking a turn. This is where they're going to show us that there's something missing. And then right after that sentence, we have the phrase, in this study, that clues us into now they're going to show how their study fills that gap. Any questions? Is that
Finished.
okay? Thank you so much. Okay. So yes, these are the basic elements of an abstract. So we want to start with some sort of context or general topic under study. You want to guide your reader in. You want to maybe think about like an upside down triangle. You want to guide your reader in with something very broad, and then you're going to narrow in as you move through the abstract. So you give us the context, you give us the exigence or the statement of the problem. You talk about your research question, your goals, how that should fit into that problem. Go through the research and the methods. Briefly overview the results, and then end with the significance. And the nice thing about an abstract is that it does pretty much follow this formula. Like, you don't really need to, I mean, you want to be creative, and we'll talk about ways to do that, but you really just follow this formula. Now, the method section, the length of it and the detail of it is going to depend on your field of study. So, does anybody in here do like textual analysis or like close reading or anything like a humanities-based? Okay, so if you're doing a humanities-based project, you might not do much with the methods, right? Like if your method is that you read a corpus of text and you found patterns in that corpus of text, you do a literary analysis. You probably don't need to dwell too deeply into the methods. So depending on your field and how like intensive your methods are, maybe not intensive isn't the right word, but it's going to depend how deep you get into the methods. Because I sometimes have people who do like textual analysis or like, what do I say there? It's implied in my field if I'm studying, the poetry of Emily Dickinson that I've read the poetry, right? You don't need to necessarily say that. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of abstracts. we're going to talk about disciplinary versus general. And when I say general here, I don't just mean anybody. I mean people who are interested in reading academic research. So this isn't going to be someone necessarily in your field of study, but it is going to be someone who's like an interested, educated person. Okay. Take a minute to think about this. What do you think the differences might be between a professional or disciplinary abstract? This is going to be written for someone in your field of study versus an abstract written for a general audience, for an educated, interested people from any disciplinary background. How might these two different kinds of abstracts be different? Yes?
The amount of technical language used.
The amount of technical language you use? Absolutely. Yep. Cool. Great. The amount of technical language you use? Really good.
I think in the disciplinary, you probably would get into more detail on your methods and results, and then in the general, you would probably focus more on the background and findings. Or
Yeah, that's a great point. And we'll look at this in a little bit, but how you describe the background might differ a little bit too. Like a general audience might not be as concerned that these 5 researchers have done something similar to you, but not exactly like you. They might be more concerned about like the general problem, like a problem that can be interesting to them, not just to like researchers in your field. And we'll look at some examples of that in a minute. Yeah, so technical language, thinking about making sure you develop a problem that they can care about. What else? Yeah.
How many words you spend basically giving definitions of certain terms that are like concentric to your argument?
Good. So we got to think about the terminology we're using. Do we need to use a certain term? If we do we define it? How much time do we spend doing that? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Anything else? Yeah. So let's look at, we're going to look at a couple abstracts now. And what I want you to do is think about with this next one, is this general, is this specific, how do you know? I mean, is this disciplinary or general, how do you know? And you are going to chat with someone near you. So maybe go ahead and find a person or people now that you don't mind chatting with. Everybody's close enough to people. And you guys chat. You guys with us? Okay, great. All right, I'm going to read this out loud. And as I'm reading, I want you to think about, is it disciplinary, is it general, how do you know? And then you're going to chat together. All right, and this is kind of a long one. In the U.S., congestive heart failure, or HF, is a common and lethal disease. Approximately 500,000 patients are diagnosed with, and approximately 300,000 deaths occur each year due to heart failure. Over the past half-century, several advances in the treatment of patients with heart failure, e.g. 2-adrenergic receptor blockade therapy, have improved survival, but only modestly. As HF remains the most prominent cause of morbidity and mortality in the U.S., it follows that current therapeutic techniques are not adequate. The goal of this study is to better understand the mechanisms that regulate the autonomic nervous system excitability in heart failure, which should lead to novel approaches for treating heart failure. We focus on the roles played by excessive G protein signaling in contributing to sympathetic overexcitability in heart failure. G protein overactivation triggers a biochemical signaling cascade that leads to BAR, desensitization, and downregulation that are characteristic of heart failure. Our research examines if G protein signaling leads to altered protein obviously this is not my area. Regulation of sympathetic excitability. Specifically, we test protein kinase activators and inhibitors for their effects on psychological function, such as cardiac output, heart rate, and arterial blood pressure. I know what that is. Our findings suggest the overactivation of GRK2 augments physiological function. Ultimately, this study provides enhanced understanding of the cellular and molecular mechanisms underlying sympathetic neuron dysfunction and the progression to heart failure, and lays the groundwork for future experiments to identify novel therapeutics to treat this disease. All right, So chat with your neighbor and think about it. Is it disciplinary? Is it general? How do you know?
I think it's obvious, disciplinary. I think it almost feels like though they start so it makes me wonder if like the overall paper is kind of like a mix of both, or it's just
I think everybody's pretty much coming to a close here. So this is a disciplinary abstract. I did hear some people say general because they were understanding it, and I do think that they explain things fairly well, and it is a very well written abstract. But it definitely is disciplinary. What are some things that you think make this a disciplinary?
Just because it's so like specific in its explanation, like we were talking, and she's an exercise science major, so she understands some of these terms. But even with all the breaking down, like we understood none of it. So
Right.
It's just not for the general public.
And you could probably read it a couple of times and get it better, right? But the general audience shouldn't have to do that with your abstract. It should be something that they can read once and have a pretty good idea of what you're saying, right? Like you don't want them to have to reread it. Yeah. Good. Other things you noticed?
We were talking about how there are a couple lines in there where it seems like it's trying to explain to a general audience, or like kind of explaining something that feels like it should be already known if they're talking about it in such technical depth. So that's why we were kind of like waffling. Yeah.
So remember that even if it is disciplinary, not everybody in the discipline is going to understand all the, right? They might not have the exact same research interest. So even a disciplinary one should like explain to some degree. Something that you said, and I heard a couple other people say, was like, they explain the terms, but if we're a general audience, do we need to know all these terms necessarily? Probably not. Like we don't. It's too specific for a general audience, right? Like we don't need to know the term. Like I've presented this like 4 or 5 times, and I don't ever remember even how to pronounce these things. Because it's not like I'm going to retain. I don't have any knowledge in my head to build on when it comes to this, so I'm not going to retain what a G2 whatever blah blah is. Other things you saw here that you thought. Okay, good. So let's break this down a little bit. So it does assume a pretty high level of disciplinary knowledge. Again, it is written well, so we can kind of figure out what it's meaning. But generally, to read this quickly and to because abstracts should be able to be read pretty quickly. You enhance understanding of the cellular and molecular mechanisms underlying sympathetic neuron dysfunction and the progression to heart failure, and lays the groundwork for future experiments to identify novel therapeutics to treat this disease. That is a really long sentence, right? There's a lot going on in that sentence. You want to maybe avoid overly complex sentences when you're writing to a general audience. Any questions or comments about this one? Like I said, it's an excellent abstract. It's got all the parts. It's doing a good job. It's just not for a general audience. All right, so this is a general version of that same abstract. I'm going to read it out loud, and as I do, I want you to think about what's been changed, what's different about this one, and then you're going to chat with your neighbor again. So it's the same study, just reformatted, rewritten for a general audience. So congestive heart failure is a common and lethal disease in the U.S. And this sentence really is pretty much the same as the last one. The first sentence is perfectly fine. Current medications for treating heart disease improve survival in some, but not all patients. Therefore, additional medications are needed to treat individuals who do not respond to current medications. Research using animal models suggests that abnormal G protein signaling may be a biochemical mechanism that may be one of the factors that cause heart disease. However, it is unknown how altered G protein activity would cause this disorder. Research has shown that G proteins can regulate the activities of several protein kinases. Did I say that right? Okay. And in turn, protein kinase activity modulates sympathetic nervous system function. As a first step to determine whether this sequence of events could lead to heart disease, this study uses pharmacological and molecular genetic approaches to establish whether a G protein regulated protein kinase can modulate cardiac physiology in vivo and cardiac cell activity in vitro. Possible protein kinases to be tested that are regulated by G proteins include G protein coupled receptor kinase 2, GRK2, P13K, and ERK1/2. This research will enhance our understanding of the cellular and molecular mechanisms underlying sympathetic neuron dysfunction that may progress to heart disease, and may identify a possible novel pharmaceutical target for future experiments to develop therapeutic compounds to treat this disease. So take a couple minutes to talk with your neighbor and think about how this has been changed for a more general audience.
Because of a series of adjectives and modulates. Things like that. But I mean, overall, it's. I wouldn't say the jump between that one and this one was huge, but there was.
Okay. That was a quick one. All right. So, what are some things you see that are different, or maybe some things you see that aren't that different? Yes.
One thing I noticed was that in the first one I had no clue it was about pharmaceutical stuff, and this one it's clear as day.
Great. That's a great point. We see the words pharmaceutical and something else here that I was like, molecular genetic approaches. Like, I know what those things are, sort of, right? Like, I might not know exactly, but it's cluing me in. Like, I definitely have a better sense of it. Absolutely. Other things you noticed? Yes?
There's no numbers, like in the last one, it's just like a very light, smooth,
Yes. We don't have to, like, process any numbers, right? Good. Very good. And I think that the exigence is a little bit clearer and more about what an average person might care about with heart disease, not necessarily like super focused on the methods. And I heard a couple people say this, but like it's lighter on method, or maybe just lighter on explaining the details of the method, right? We still have methods in here, right? And there is still some jargon, because ultimately you're still going to have to talk about what you do. You can't just make new words for everything, right? There are going to be things that your audience might not know exactly. But we still, I think, get the gist of what they're doing here. And like I can trust, those sounds like cool methods, but at least I'm not hung up on the methods to a point where I feel like I can't even get through the sentence, right? Anything else you notice? The sentence structure is easier to read. We don't have any of those really long, complex sentences with a bunch of different like methods and words I don't know. Okay, cool. So, there is still kind of a moderate amount of disciplinary knowledge to understand everything about the study. Like it's not, you you know, you to understand all the details, you would still need to know about the, you know, the jargon or the disciplinary knowledge. But even if you have no disciplinary knowledge, you're getting a sense of what what it's about. It uses much less jargon. There are still some words that we might not know, but they are easier to digest. And it's written very clearly and concisely. Concisely meaning like pretty short. I don't mean use a bunch of short, choppy sentences. I just mean try to avoid those long, complex sentence structures because that can trip a reader up. Okay. So we're going to look at 2 more examples, and these are examples from Office of Undergraduate Research folks like you guys. And I just randomly found these examples from a list from a bunch of different examples from our abstracts. And the first one is not, the methods are not super complex. I don't think, well, they are, but they're not like super like molecular, like that kind of stuff. But the second one is a bit more complex, but both do a really good job of making the research digestible for a reader. All right, so I'm going to read this one again, and as I do, I want you to think about what the writer does well here to cater their abstract to a general audience. All right, so this one reads window, and it's a little bit long. This one's a little long, but it is in the number range that you guys have to write in. All right, window collisions are among the most common causes of death for birds worldwide. I did not know that until I read this abstract, by the way. With urbanization on the ride, window collisions may increasingly become a persistent threat to bird populations. Bird window collisions most often occur at low-rise buildings, where over half, or 56%, of the collisions involve buildings that are 4 to 11 stories high, while the remaining collisions, or 44%, occur at 1 to 3 story buildings. We collected preliminary data for the occurrence of bird window collisions on a campus where vegetation and low-rise buildings are interspersed. We monitored 22 building sites at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte that were deemed most likely for bird collisions, based on the number and size of windows, vegetation cover, and bird activity. We walked along the building's side slowly over an average of 5 minutes looking for dead or injured birds at each site 3 times per week. The preliminary results of this assessment showed that of the 680 monitoring surveys performed thus far, there were 26 deaths involving 10 species, 2 of which were unknown. The species most at risk from bird collisions were American robins, or Turdus migratorius, with 10 deaths, and mourning doves, or Zenaida macrora, with 4 deaths. This is consistent with the abundance of these species. These results suggest that locations with thick patches of vegetation nearest the building may be areas of concern for bird collisions. Sides of buildings with dense vegetation patches may be good candidates for the use of bird-friendly glass in windows to reduce bird window collisions. So what do y'all think this does well? Yes. So you mentioned there's no numbers. In this one there is numbers, but the nice thing about these numbers is that they're really easy to understand. Like, these are simple numbers, and I like that they put over half, or 56%. So you kind of have 2 ways of understanding those numbers, right? Like, if you're not a numbers person, you like know what half means, right? And they definitely, like, they're simple numbers that we can easily digest. So numbers are not a no-no. But when you're using numbers, make sure they're like easy to understand and read, right? Good. Other things you notice that you like? Yeah.
Can you explain why they chose the size they were looking at?
Yeah, they do a really good job, I think, of explaining the methods. Like, I feel like I have a good sense of what happened here. And it's really simple to read. Like, the wording is so simple to read. It's super, like, clear. So this is not a type of writing where you want to think like, oh, the bigger the words, the better. I want to sound fancy. No, this is a type of writing where you need to be like it's kind of bare bones-ish, right? You want it to be just super digestible. Other things, what about jargon? Is there any jargon? There is some jargon, the bird names, but they're, you could skip right over those if you didn't want to read them. But I like that they're in here, because they do kind of speak to that expert audience too. Other things you liked about this? Okay, let's look at another one, and this one, I think, well, we already kind of looked at this, but this is the one we just read. No disciplinary knowledge needed, avoids jargon. It's written really clearly and concisely, and it uses numbers the audience can conceptualize. So yeah, really well done. And I'm sure the methods were more complex than this, right? Like I'm sure there were a more complex way you could describe the methods here, but they do a really good job of keeping it simple for us. And also, I think for me as a reader, caring about this research. You'll see that when they're building their exigence or their problem, they don't really mention other research. They really keep the problem to like something that a general audience would care about, like birds dying, right? And I think that works really well. All right, so the next one we're going to look at, which is the last, I'm pretty sure is the last abstract we're going to look at, I think was probably harder to write and harder to make someone care about because it's a little bit more like super technical, but they do a really good job of keeping it simple. Okay, so this person writes, people should be able to trust that their drinking water is clean, but sometimes water filters aren't good enough to keep everything out. Bad chemicals such as, I'm not even going to read that, PFAS, require special methods to remove them from the water, such as running them through special beads called ion exchange resins. These resins catch PFAS compounds as the water flows through and later gets washed by a washing solution to be reused. Different resins have different levels of effectiveness of removing PFAS from contaminated waters. The current washing solution being used isn't strong enough to rinse the PFAS off the most effective resins, leading to these resins becoming a single-use product. This led researchers to ask the question, are there alternative washing solutions to remove PFAS compounds from contaminated resin to reuse the resin? To test this theory, a portion of water was pre-contaminated with 6 PFAS compounds, and resin was added to the mixture for contamination. Then, the spiked resin was separated out into 10 portions, and 5 different washing solutions were applied to 2 portions of resin each. Samples were collected each step of the process in order to analyze the results in a separate machine. From those samples, researchers found that the stronger the metal chloride in the different washing solutions, the more effective the solution was in removing the PFAS from the resin. This means that resin may be able to be reused more than once, reducing the amount of waste this type of ion exchange resin produces. The more frequently the resin can be reused, the less waste that will be produced during the filtration process. Drinking can be both clean while producing less waste to clean. All right, so what are some things you like here? I think this writer does some really smart things here.
They describe some things using like qualitative language instead of like being quantifiable because like general readers wouldn't know what that means.
Great, so can you give an example?
Well, bad chemicals is the clearest one.
Yeah, I love the use of bad chemicals here. Like, it might seem like that's kind of a dumbed down, but for me as the reader who knows nothing about this, it really works. Because in my brain, it just connects PFAS with bad, right? And that's all I need to know because I don't know what PFAS is. So that use of bad chemicals, like you said, the qualitative description, really works for me as a reader. Other things you think they do well, yes?
Is there methods in chronological order which help you follow along with them?
Yes, it's very chronological and very simple in the explanation of what they do. Now, it's not simple. Obviously, what they did wasn't simple at all. But the way they describe it, it makes it really digestible. Yeah.
Their tone is kind of a little less formal, so that kind of helps helps make it seem like, oh, it's someone talking to me instead of you're trying to read like a textbook.
Exactly, like it feels like this person, who's very smart obviously, described something to me like in the way that they knew I could understand it. And that really works. Like people always say, you don't want to write how you talk, but sometimes you do kind of want to write how you talk. Not meaning you want to have ums and likes and things like that, but you want it to be how you would describe it very clearly to someone. Yeah, good. Other things you liked here?
I felt like the implications were really clear.
Yeah, the implications are super clear and they're not overly complex. It's like, we want drinking water to be clean, but we also don't want to have a bunch of waste. Okay, I'm on board. Yeah, for sure. Super, super clear, and but again, not overly complex. Yeah. Yes.
I like how they kind of use the principle where, things that people remember the most about something they read is usually like the first and the last
Yes.
sentence. And they use that last sentence really well to basically send a vision to the reader.
Absolutely. So when you're writing a sentence, often we want to move from old information to new information. And then that new information becomes old information and we move to new information. That's exactly what they do here. The sentences are all very well linked. So for instance, they say, bad chemicals, blah, 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 require special methods to remove them from the water, such as running them through special beads called exchange resins. These resins catch blah, blah, blah. So they do a really good job of linking each sentence together so that we can easily follow how the information is progressing. Yeah, really good. And it might seem a little repetitive to the writer that they keep kind of saying the same words over again. But for the reader, that repetition actually works when we're learning something complex. It's okay to be a little repetitive if you're talking about something that is complex, right? Good. Other things you liked here? Okay, great. So I think you guys did a really good job of seeing what makes a general abstract really kind of like digestible and understandable for a reader. So again, just to reiterate, there's little to no disciplinary knowledge needed to understand this abstract. If there is jargon, there's really only this, like, I'm not going to repeat it, but they do a good job, the PFAS, they do a good job of just making you know, hey, PFAS is bad. That's all you need to know here. PFAS is bad. And it's written really clearly and concisely, not very complex sentence structures. So there are a couple of other things I want to talk about before we end today. Just a couple of other important considerations. So your abstract should stand alone. The reader should not have to read the rest of your paper to get the gist of your research. Not all the details, right? But the kind of overview, the gist. Abstracts generally do not include citations, so you are kind of writing on your own here. Abstracts are context specific, meaning they're going to look different depending on where you're writing them, so keep that in mind. And verb tenses and pronouns are discipline specific. So let's dive into that briefly on kind of like, you've seen through these different abstracts, we saw some people using the word I, some people using the word we. You saw some people using a lot of, maybe you recognize this passive voice and not using any I's or we's. So let's kind of just talk about that a little bit, because I often get questions about that, with the caveat that this is discipline specific. So you will need to figure out how it's done in your own disciplines. So there are, I would say, 3 kind of main ways to use pronouns or not in your writing. So the first one we have is first person. This is where you're going to be using I or we. First person is often used in the humanities, sometimes used in the social sciences, often avoided in STEM fields. Okay? So if you are in a STEM field, you might very well have to avoid using I or we. Social sciences and humanities often used. So for example, in this study, we investigate the influence of chief executive officers' perceived social class origins on firm risk-taking. We clearly see there is a we, it is the researchers, and the researchers are doing the research. There's an action there's an action verb. The action verb is investigate. Okay. If you are not allowed to use first person, you can do this by using third person or passive voice. So third person is where you refer to yourself, like you hear people say, refer to yourself in the third person. Like instead of saying I'd say Katie or the presenter. That's how I would refer to myself in the third person. This can be used to avoid first person. So for example, the authors investigate the influence of parents on social acceptance, or the present study examined the relations among the psychological factors. So these are two ways to keep the voice active. You still have action verbs, like examined and investigate, but you don't have IRE. Now that is also sometimes prohibited in some STEM fields, like in engineering. Often the use of that is also prohibited. So what you can do is use passive voice, which is where you just take the subject out of the sentence completely. So for instance, data were collected from undergraduate students using the survey. Who collected the data? Obviously the researchers, but because we're talking about the data being collected, we're removing the researchers from the writing. Now, if your eyes just glaze over and you're like, no, absolutely not. You can talk to your advisors. You can look and see, like in the papers that you're reading, how that's done. But yeah, it's very much discipline specific. When I was in grad school, I was a research assistant for an engineer, and I wrote a lot of her papers. And the first article that I wrote with her, I used first person because I'm in the humanities, we use first person. And the reviewers of the article were like, what in the world? Are you an idiot? Like, what are you doing? Because it's just like a totally different, like, context for writing. This is a good link to a website that talks a little bit about the different considerations of each type of verb tense, because verb tense meaning like, do you talk about your research in the past tense? Do you talk about your research in the present tense? That is also. All right, let's take just 2 or 3 more minutes before, we've got some time. Let's take a couple minutes, and wherever you've been writing things down, write down what you want to take away from today. What did you learn? What do you want to make sure that you remember when you sit down to write your abstract? Okay, I guess I don't have a question slide. And I have this slide with our hours, but these are wrong, so I'm going to those are the summer hours. So if you want to make an appointment in the WRC, our website is wrc.charlotte.edu. You can click schedule an appointment on this page. We have lots of open hours here, our schedules. We have 3 schedules. Cameron is where we're located, Cameron 125. We have appointments all week, basically. And we have evening hours in Atkins and online. So before we end, does anyone have any questions about abstracts or about writing in general or the Writing Center? Happy to answer. Yes?
For the Writing Center, do you guys also help with like ideation, or if like, I need help figuring out this part of the paper?
Absolutely, great question. That's mostly what we do, honestly, is, so she asked like, do we help with ideation or like talk through things with each other? Yeah, that's mostly what we do, is we have a conversation with you And whatever your goals are is what the tutor's gonna help you with. So if you're like, I need to talk through this issue, I need to talk through what I'm thinking, because I just can't seem to get it on paper. And it's really good to be able to do that with another person. So the person can say, okay, so what I hear you saying is this. Does that make sense? Okay, great, now write it down. Like, I can't tell you how many times in the writing center, someone's like, I don't know how to say it, and then they say it, and I'm like, you said it perfectly, let's write that. Yeah, so a lot of that, you can come at any stage of the writing process, not just with a full paper. You can be brainstorming early in the process. Yes.
When you're writing your abstract and you get to like the part where you have to write your results, is that part like what you think the results are going to be? Do you have it?
Yes, you can. So you can say something like, we expect blah, 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 or, you know, we hypothesize blah, blah, blah. Yes. If you're at the point where you have to write an abstract without results, you can kind of speculate. Yeah.
And you will have to do that for this program. So get over it right now. Drives me nuts. That's part of being in academics. If your mentors ever say that they submit abstracts with everything totally finalized in their research, they're lying through their teeth. That's what we do when we're getting ready to submit to conferences or anything like that. It's months in advance. So yes, that is what we expect in your first draft on March 5th. We anticipate that, we expect that, blah, blah, blah. We hypothesize this will be blah, blah, blah. Like however fancy disciplinary way you want to say it is fine. You will not have things done in that school.
I can count on like 1 or 2 times in my life I've submitted a conference abstract and actually known the results. It's usually like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm doing this next month, I guess